damage to international relations. President Donald Trump's second term has introduced a series of assertive foreign policy actions that are reshaping international relations. His America First agenda emphasizes U.S. interests, often at the expense of traditional alliances and global cooperation. Trade relations and tariffs. In early 2025, President Trump imposed significant tariffs, 25% on imports from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on Chinese goods. These measures, justified by concerns over illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking, have strained relationships with neighboring countries and disrupted global trade dynamics. The economic impact includes potential price increases for consumers and retaliatory actions from affected nations. Diplomatic relations and expansionist policies. The administration's approach has been characterized by aggressive tactics, including coercion and economic pressure. Notably, the U.S. pressured Colombia into accepting deported migrants by threatening severe tariffs and sanctions, leading to swift compliance from the Colombian government. This incident signals a willingness to leverage economic power to achieve policy goals, potentially unsettling both allies and adversaries. Additionally, President Trump has revisited expansionist ideas, such as proposing the purchase of Greenland from Denmark and demanding control over the Panama Canal. These moves have been met with international concern and have the potential to further strain diplomatic relations. Impact on international alliances. The administration's unilateral actions have led to tensions within alliances such as NATO. President Trump's insistence that member nations meet defense spending targets and his reluctance to commit to collective defense obligations have caused unease among allies. This approach may weaken traditional alliances and embolden adversaries. Global influence and power dynamics. As the U.S. adopts a more isolationist and transactional stance, other global powers, notably China, are seizing opportunities to strengthen their influence. China has been improving relationships with countries like Japan and India, potentially filling the void left by the U.S. This shift could lead to a realignment of global power structures, with long-term implications for international stability. While some argue that President Trump's assertive policies may yield short-term gains, they carry significant risks. The potential for economic disruption, weakened alliances, and a diminished global standing for the U.S. could have lasting negative effects on international relations in the coming years. Mitigating the damage. Mitigating the potential damage to international relations under Donald Trump's presidency will require proactive strategies by diplomats, businesses, activists, state governments, and opposition leaders. Here's what can be done over the next years to contain and counteract negative impacts. Strengthen diplomatic channels outside the White House. Congressional diplomacy. U.S. senators, representatives, and governors should engage in independent diplomacy with foreign leaders, reassuring allies that Trump's policies do not represent a permanent shift. City and state-level agreements. States and cities can maintain international cooperation in areas like climate change, e.g., through networks like the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. Bipartisan foreign policy messaging. High-profile Democrats and moderate Republicans should make public commitments to restoring alliances post-Trump, ensuring foreign leaders don't completely disengage from the U.S. Limit the impact of harmful trade policies. Encourage business-led diplomacy. Major U.S. companies with global influence, e.g., Apple, Tesla, Google, can work directly with international trade partners to maintain economic ties, circumventing extreme tariffs. Lobby Congress to block harmful tariffs. Business coalitions and economic advisors should pressure Congress to limit trade wars that harm U.S. industries. Work with global trade organizations, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and other international bodies can serve as stabilizers, preventing Trump's policies from completely derailing global commerce. Strengthen international alliances without Trump's direct involvement. NATO and defense alliances. European allies should increase their own defense spending and establish more independent security mechanisms while keeping the U.S. engaged through congressional and Pentagon relationships. Work around the White House in global diplomacy. U.S. diplomats and career officials should continue working with the UN, G7, and G20 behind the scenes, even if Trump publicly undermines them. Strengthen regional partnerships. Encourage Canada, Mexico, and EU leaders to maintain North American and transatlantic cooperation at diplomatic and economic levels. Counter authoritarian influence from China and Russia. Strengthen media and combat disinformation campaigns. US media, NGOs, and cyber experts should counteract Russian and Chinese narratives that exploit Trump's international blunders. Support allies in countering China's expanding influence. Encourage Japan, India, and Australia to take leadership roles in counterbalancing China's Belt and Road Initiative. Encourage military-to-military communications. The Pentagon should maintain independent communication with allies and adversaries to prevent military escalations, even if Trump's rhetoric is hostile. Strengthen the global reputation of the U.S. Boost cultural diplomacy. Encourage U.S. universities, artists, and tech industries to engage internationally, maintaining soft power connections. Expand people-to-people exchange programs. Universities, businesses, and NGOs should fund educational and professional exchanges that sustain goodwill abroad. Counter Trump's messaging with public diplomacy. High-profile figures, former presidents, diplomats, and intellectuals should conduct media outreach to reassure international audiences that Trump's policies do not reflect long-term U.S. values. Prepare for post-Trump restoration. Document and challenge policy damage. Experts, diplomats, and policymakers should keep detailed records of Trump's harmful policies to ensure a smooth reversal under the next administration. Strengthen pro-democracy coalitions. Reinforce democratic institutions and international watchdog groups to minimize Trump's potential authoritarian tendencies. Create contingency plans for treaty restorations. Work with global partners to set the stage for quickly rejoining international agreements post-Trump. Leverage U.S. domestic opposition to Trump's policies. Utilize the courts to block harmful actions. Legal challenges against extreme executive orders can slow down or prevent Trump's most damaging decisions. Engage in grassroots advocacy. Encourage activism and lobbying to resist damaging foreign policy shifts. Elect pro-diplomacy leaders at the state and local levels. State governors, mayors, and legislators should emphasize diplomacy-friendly policies that limit damage from federal actions. While the Trump administration may strain international relations, these strategies can help mitigate long-term damage, maintain global cooperation, and set the stage for a diplomatic recovery once he leaves office. Key players, Congress, businesses, diplomats, and global allies must work together to minimize disruptions and ensure the U.S. remains a credible global partner. Recovering diplomatic relations. If Donald Trump's presidency damages international relations, the next administration will need to take strategic actions to repair alliances, rebuild trust, and stabilize global partnerships. Here are key strategies to reverse the damage once he is removed from office. Reaffirm commitments to alliances and international agreements. Rejoin and strengthen NATO. Publicly reaffirm the U.S. commitment to NATO's Article 5, collective defense, and work with allies to reinforce security agreements. Re-enter multilateral agreements. If Trump withdraws from international pacts, e.g., the Paris Climate Agreement, the WHO, or trade agreements, the next administration should prioritize rejoining and renegotiating fair terms. Rebuild trust with the United Nations. Actively participate in UN peacekeeping, human rights initiatives, and global diplomacy efforts. Restore economic and trade stability. Lift harmful tariffs and renegotiate trade deals. Remove unilateral tariffs that have damaged relations with allies and negotiate new trade agreements that prioritize fair trade without unnecessary economic strain. Repair relations with Canada, Mexico, and the EU. Strengthen trade ties through diplomatic talks, emphasizing mutual benefits over economic coercion. Ease global supply chain tensions. Work with international partners to re-establish supply chain stability, especially in critical sectors like semiconductors and energy. Conduct diplomatic outreach and strategic apologies. Send diplomatic delegations to key allies, a worldwide reconciliation tour with high-level envoys, including the President, Secretary of State, and diplomats, can help mend relationships. Issue strategic apologies where necessary, a carefully worded acknowledgement of past mistakes, without undermining U.S. sovereignty, can go a long way in restoring trust. Reestablish respect for diplomacy. Reverse any damage to the State Department by reinvesting in diplomatic personnel and prioritizing diplomatic solutions over aggressive tactics. Counter China and Russia's influence with cooperative strategies. Reaffirm Pacific alliances. Strengthen partnerships with Japan, South Korea, and Australia to counterbalance China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. Rebuild European relations to counter Russian aggression. Support Ukraine and NATO allies while reinforcing economic sanctions against Russian expansionism. Promote democratic values in Latin America and Africa. Engage in economic partnerships and development programs to counterbalance Chinese and Russian investments in these regions. Restore U.S. soft power and global reputation. Reopen cultural and educational exchange programs. Revitalize Fulbright, Peace Corps, and other people-to-people diplomacy programs that were cut under Trump's presidency. Improve public diplomacy and media engagement. Work with global media to reframe U.S. foreign policy in a positive light, emphasizing collaboration, fairness, and shared progress. Lead in global crisis response. Actively participate in humanitarian aid, disaster relief, and health initiatives to show that the U.S. is a responsible global leader. Strengthen domestic institutions to prevent future damage. Reform foreign policy decision-making. Establish guardrails to prevent a single administration from unilaterally exiting treaties or alliances without congressional approval. Increase congressional oversight on foreign affairs. Ensure that checks and balances prevent reckless executive actions that could damage international relations. Strengthen whistleblower protections. Encourage transparency in foreign policy decisions to prevent corruption and authoritarian-style governance. Conclusion. While the damage to international relations under Trump's presidency may be significant, it is reversible with strategic diplomatic efforts, policy reversals, and a renewed commitment to multilateralism. A well-executed restoration plan can not only repair past mistakes, but also create a stronger, more cooperative global order.